Hi everyone, welcome back to another podcast style episode. Today we will be talking about one of the SOTA locations that Jeff has done quite often. In fact, he was the first to activate many of the peaks in the park, and that is Pinnacles National Park.
Yep.
So you want to give us an intro to what Pinnacles National Park is, where it is, and why you would want to go there?
Yeah, it's a small national park down south of San Jose, sort of near Salinas in that area, if you're familiar with California. Um, it's interesting because I think it was an old volcano there back millions of years ago, whatever. That's eroded, so right now there's a bunch of just like rock formations in the region called the High Peaks region and some cliff faces and stuff. So it's popular with climbers, and it's also one of the few places where they release California condors back into the wild. So there's a pretty good chance you'll see some of those flying around if you go to visit. Plus, it's just it's a nice place. It's a fun park to hike. They have caves and waterfalls, and the High Peaks Trail has got little steps cut in the rocks and boardwalks and all sorts of fun things. So it's a fun little park.
So, in terms of SOTA, how many peaks are there inside the park?
There are there are five peaks that are the peak is actually inside the park, and there's a sixth one that the peak is just outside, but the activation zone extends into the park, and the rest of the area around that peak is all private. So I count it as one of the Pinnacles peaks, since that's the only place you can activate it from.
So, let's get into the specific peaks.
Okay.
So, let's start with North and South Chalone.
Yeah. So they're at the south end of the park. Um, from a, I don't want to say they're easy because it is a decent hike up North Chalone, but in terms of getting there, it's not hard. There's a maintained trail all the way to the summit, so you can just leave the parking lot. You don't have to get off the trail. You can get all the way up to North Chalone, which has I think it's an old fire tower or something up there. And there's even a little pit toilet. And South Chalone is not too far past that, which doesn't actually have a trail to the summit, but you can take the trail into the activation zone, or you can follow a fence and get into the activation zone. So it's pretty easy to get up. And they're both 2-point peaks, so if you're in shape, it's a nice little 4-point day. And North Chalone, I believe, is the highest point in the park. So if you like collecting high points, that's one you can get. So usually when I do them, I do both of them. Usually I'll go to South Chalone first and get north on my way back. But there's no reason you have to do it that way. Um, but yeah, they're pretty straightforward to get. Nothing tricky there.
And what radios do you usually bring with you?
Uh, I don't know. I mean, the hike is long enough that I like to bring the smaller and lighter ones. So usually just the mountain topper. Um, I have gotten some contacts on VHF. It does look down at the Salinas Valley, so if there's people in Salinas or like Monterey in that area, maybe even up to Santa Cruz, you can get them on line of sight, but definitely easier with HF.
And well, you already talked a lot about it, about the hike itself, but any other advice for anyone wanting to hike to North or South Chalone?
Um, no, I mean, if you've never been, I would recommend Hawkins Peak, but if you've been at least once, I'd recommend the Chalones as the next peaks to do.
So let's start talking about Hawkins Peak then. So kind of the same set of questions of how to access the peak and kind of your activation experience and any advice that you have.
Yeah, so Hawkins is the highest peak in the High Peaks region, and the loop I've done a few times I've done it is start at the Bear Gulch area, and you can go up through the Talus Caves if they're open, which is pretty cool. And you came with me when we did that. You can confirm that that's a fun part of it. And at the top end of the caves, you hike off switchbacks up to the ridge, and then on top of the ridge, there's a bunch of like rock faces where they've drilled CCC drilled steps into the rocks and put metal handrails, and a couple parts where there's like boardwalks around the side of a cliff and stuff. So that's pretty fun, I think, to hike on. And then Hawkins Peak, you do have to step off the trail, but there's some popular climbing routes up near the summit. So there's a lot of a lot of climber use paths, and the summit requires climbing, but there's an open field just below the summit you can sit in that doesn't require anything technical and be in the activation zone. So that's what I've done. Same thing, whatever radios you want to bring, a little harder on FM, on VHF. I was going to say, and if you're going to go through the caves, don't bring a long pole that sticks way out the top of your backpack, because you'll be bumping into stuff and taking it out and you have to carry it and stuff. So keep that in mind when you're packing, that you don't want to be poking out too much if you're going through the caves. And you can bypass the caves if that's not your thing. But yeah, you did Hawkins Peak. You liked it, didn't you? Or tolerated it?
Yeah, it was really nice. We even saw some of the condors from there. And it's a good one if, like you said, if it's your first time in the park and you want to get a little bit of the tourist attraction with
the highlights of everything.
Yeah, get the caves and the the stairs inside the edge of the mountain, and then also do a SOTA as well and have a picnic. So it really worked out, and it was fun.
Yeah.
It was hard for me to make contacts though, because
you were doing
I only had 2 meters, so I think I made 2 contacts. So.
Yeah, alas.
But Jeff was able to easily make contact with his. I think it was a mountain topper, right? That you brought.
Yeah, that's usually the one I bring if it's a longer hike or I don't want to carry too much.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the next peak. I believe is Pig Fence.
Yeah, so that's not its official name. It doesn't have an official name. It's just Peak 28, or I don't even know what the elevation is, but somebody, I think Bob Bird, called it Pig Fence Peak because there's a very well-maintained fence running along the ridge put there to keep the wild pigs out. So that's what I've taken to calling it. That one is navigationally not too hard. There's a couple different places you can park. None of them are super close to the base. I'm not sure what's better, to park at the visitor center or to drive up to the Peak View area, I believe it's called. And then you gotta hike around the base a little, and then there's a little bit of bushwhacking to find the bottom of the fence. And then you can just basically follow the fence up the ridge and then go over a couple bumps, and then you'll get to the high point. Somebody, AB6D, found a different route following a different fence and started near the turnoff from the highway at the entrance to the park. But when I went down there last year a couple times, there's a big electronic sign where he parked where the fence came down that says no parking. So I wouldn't recommend it if there's a big sign flashing no parking there. But yeah, that one, it's follow the fence, I guess. That one's on I guess all these peaks we've talked about so far, starting on the east side of the park. There's the east side and the west side, and there's no road connecting them. So it's a couple-hour drive to get from one to the other. But these ones we've talked about so far are all starting on the west side, or starting on the east side.
And peak 2520?
Yeah, so that's 2520. You want to start on the west side. That's the one that's just outside the park boundary. And how do I go up there? So you can follow the trail up, and then there's this col And at the Cole, the trail comes down and turns right and continues down into the was it Chalone Creek or something like that, drainage on the other side, and you just go straight and step off the trail. And there's some old use paths and fire breaks and stuff you can follow, and you sort of wind your way up the hill and over a couple little sub peaks, and then you get to the edge of the park. Which last time I was there, I wasn't paying attention, and I just was walking, and all of a sudden I was on the actual peak, and it was like, whoops, there's no fence or signs or anything, so I had to turn around and backtrack a little to get back inside the park before putting up my antenna. So be careful about that if you're going up there, that you don't go too far, because turns out there's no fence, no signs or anything right there at the edge of the park. So that one requires a bit of bushwhacking, and there are a couple areas where it's the dense brush you got to push through. So if you're not confident fighting through the scrub and stuff, the chaparral, I would not recommend that peak, since you're gonna get dirty, you're gonna get cut up.
Is that one of the ones that you were the first activator?
Uh, yeah, I believe. Let's see. I believe I got the first activation on South Chalone, on Pig Fence, on this one, and then on the other one, Harris Benchmark, up in the north. And the other two, somebody had beat me by a year or two, I think. So it wasn't even like a close thing. Whatever.
So for Harris Benchmark, then I think that's the last SOTA peak.
Yeah, that one is quite a hike. Definitely the most difficult of all the peaks in the park. The first time I did it, I started on the west side and went up that way, and the second time I started on the east side. There's I could talk for a while, pros and cons about doing it each way. The first time it was the middle of the summer, which was a mistake, so it was pretty hot. I didn't choose to do it that same way the second time because there's a big climb out. Like, you come down and you get to the Chalone Creek bed, and then you got to climb up a couple hundred feet over the Cole, up to the Cole where you turn off for the peak that's right outside the park, and then drop down again. Whereas if you start on the east side, you can follow the Chalone Creek bed all the way up to the base, essentially, and then you pick your place to go up the ridge and follow the ridge around. So in that regard, it was easier. However, it was a very wet winter last year, 2023, when I went in April or something, and there's a lot of creek crossings if you go up from the east side. So that was a bit of a challenge to try and keep my feet as dry as possible. However, it was in some ways easier because it's essentially flat going in. Then you step off the trail and it's fairly flat, and you're bushwhacking along some tributary creek. And then I found a fence that I could follow up to the ridge. That was pretty clear. And then in satellite view, it looked like the ridge was relatively clear, but it turns out there were some bushwhacky sections. So that was a little bit of a challenge, but nothing too bad. So, it's a long hike, a lot of bushwhacking. Don't do it unless you're prepared, and get in touch with me if you want more tips or ideas on how to get Harris Benchmark.
Well, I think that concludes all of the peaks and pinnacles.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's possible to do all of them in one day, but I think you have done them over the course of 2 days, right? 2 or 3 days. You do.
Well, if you're ambitious, you could do North and South Chalone in a day, and then you could do, if you didn't want to go through the caves and stuff, you could do Hawkins and that peak outside the park in a day, and then Harris Benchmark will take a full day, and then I guess that just leaves Pig Fence, which if you're in shape or something, you could tack on after one of those days.
3 or 4 days, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I did it over a couple months since we had the park pass, so I could just go in for free and um, just do one or two, normal amount of hiking and enjoy it and enjoy the summits and not be in a rush. So that was nice. See every single part of Pinnacles just about.
Yeah, it's a good way to tour the park too.
I mean,
See
almost from
different.
Hawkins, or not Hawkins, Harris Benchmark is just about at the north boundary of the park, and South Chalone is not too far from the south boundary, so you do see the length and breadth of the park if you do all six peaks.
Anything else you want to say before we close?
No, it's definitely worth a trip if you're in the area or you live here to go check out Pinnacles. I'd recommend it. And even if you don't want to do all the peak bagging, there's still plenty of nice hikes you can do. Or if you're into climbing, you can do that.
I agree. I think it's definitely worth a visit, and there's some really unique features in that park, and as well as the condors, and just yeah, good hikes. Well, thanks again for tuning in for another episode, and we'll see you all next time. 73.
73.
Bye.